There's actually three models in the world today. The European city, which has very similar issues and very similar policies. The American city, which is largely suburban, and then the Asian city, which is gigantic, super dense, and actually the only city that is really still developing. The problem is actually that American urbanists want to emulate European cities. And, they are trying to institute in Los Angeles, of all places, to institute the model of the street wall, the even cornice line taken from the European city. And I think that really negates what the American city actually is. So I think the European city for many is still a model. And of course, you like the city that you know. And the European city has a long history. I love these cities myself. They're fantastic. Paris, Barcelona, Milan. I love to experience them. But to export them to the United States as a model, to me, is completely wrong. And when we look at the cities, particularly in the American West, they have a very different history. They have a very different urban form. And living there is a very different experience. I think that a lot of recent work has been done among suburban historians that shows that suburbs are very complex places and that simple understandings of them as bad is no longer true, that they're constantly evolving and changing, that they're completely diverse places, that there is every kind of suburb. And so it's actually impossible to really generalize. So I think that even the suburb doesn't exist. There are just multiple suburbs. If we look at the English language literature on the compact city versus the dispersed city, there is no agreement that the compact city is actually, it may be more sustainable, but ecologically, it is certainly not better. Because it also, with the fixed built environment, it's almost impossible to change or alter. Whereas the suburbs are much looser, they're low density, there's still a lot of room to alter them. Not all urbanists criticize, even European urbanists criticize suburbs. If you think of the work of Paola Vigano in Venice and Lausanne, she has been one of the pioneers of new ways of thinking about this kind of disaggregated city, in which she sees everywhere in Italy. And in fact, Italy is a country of extreme urbanization, but in a very diffuse way. So this idea that città diffusa is not just in the U.S., but actually once you start looking, you find it everywhere. Now, intensity does not depend on density, especially with electronic communications. And actually, Melvin Weber in 1964 had the model of the non-place urban realm, which is an urban realm that depends on communication, and says that communication is actually the essence of urbanity. And certainly now with computers and the internet, social media, etc., you can have intensity without having density. And so the idea, even in the economic field of face-to-face communication, it doesn't depend on a dense downtown. People meet everywhere. And actually, one of the early critiques of suburbs is that there's too much meeting. There's too much socialization. There are actually dense suburbs as well, or suburbs that have islands of density among lower density. Certainly, San Francisco is no longer an economically powerful city. All of the economic energy and innovation move to a completely suburban location in multiple suburbs in Silicon Valley. I mean, each big company has their own suburb. Google is in Mountain View. Apple is in Cupertino. Economically speaking, most of the development today is happening not in central cities, but in the suburbs and further out. San Francisco is in a huge crisis because all companies are leaving. They don't want to be in dense skyscrapers. They actually either have remote work or they actually move to suburban office parks. A lot of people would argue that cities like Paris, San Francisco, maybe even Manhattan, but less, have become more like urban theme parks of urbanism and urban experience, where you can go and experience urban excitement and density. But it's not really a city in the old sense of being a very diverse, active, economically significant place. And San Francisco, definitely, that has happened. In Europe, you have a policy that you can use. In the United States, it's almost impossible because these economic phenomena of the real estate market and gentrification are very uncontrollable because we don't have any policy weapons to deal with them. And so once it gets started, it's almost impossible to stop. But actually, personally, I think that the troubles that San Francisco is having right now may be a good thing. Maybe a lot of people will leave. Maybe economic activity will slow down, and that will open the doors to lower rents. The real estate market may go down. And so the city could actually come back in a different version. I would say the urban hierarchy is flattened. It's no longer a pyramid with San Francisco at the top. It's actually the mega region is really flat. And so things are much more spread out. You know, job centers are 30 miles away from the center. So all of these things, you know, the future is not necessarily clear. I would say that suburbanization is not the problem, it is the solution. And I mean, what we see in the Bay Area are African Americans moving from substandard housing that is still very expensive to suburban houses that they can buy that are much better than where they lived before. And so there's a long history of African Americans, in spite of incredible restrictions against suburban house buying, et cetera, moving to the suburbs. Because the suburbs represent a better life. So I think that the question of segregation, are we talking about cities? Are we talking about suburbs? What are we talking about? And it's interesting because there are African-American majority suburbs, and African-Americans voluntarily move there, so they will not be minorities. And so I think this changes the question. And it doesn't mean that there hasn't been a history of incredible segregation. The government, actually a very active partner in creating segregation, redlining, et cetera. But I think now there is a lot of attention to the results of that unfortunate history. The suburbs now have become important repositories of cultural activities, much more than San Francisco, which is a city of great restaurants, rich people, some cultural activities, but nothing new and exciting. I would say that a lot of the new and exciting culture is coming from the suburbs. Young people who grow up there and actually reflect on their suburban experiences. I think the so-called missing middle is actually already exist as models in many suburbs. Duplexes, fourplexes, very small apartment buildings, single-family houses with accessory dwelling units in the back. I live in a neighborhood that looks like very large single-family houses, but actually they're not. Some of them have 4 students living in their house. Some of them have 2 apartments. So actually behind what looks like a single-family facade, you find multiple arrangements of houses. And so I think building small buildings, multifamily housing is definitely the way to go. And I think that's what is happening now. But actually, the public policy does not favor that. It favors density, density, density. And so it changes the character of the suburb in a dramatic way, whereas this missing middle kind of housing really retains it. The city is very dense, packed in, with a really a lot of investment in the built environment that cannot be changed, whereas the countryside is open. But I think, again, these two models suggest that there is nothing in the middle. And that's what the suburb is. And that's why it's so difficult to understand, because we have an image of the countryside, we have an image of the city, but the image of the suburb is up for grabs. And so we don't really know what it is. And I think that should be a positive rather than a negative problem.